Welcome back. It's the Big Blue Banter, New York Giants football podcast. I'm Dan Schneider, joined as always my co-host Nick Filato. Today we're here to break down the evolution of the Giants roster under Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen. What we're going to do is look at the roster they inherited in 2022 when they first got here. We're going to look at the roster as it was last year. And then we're going to look at the roster now. So we're going to take a look at two things. One, the roster progression from 2022 to now in 2025. And then two, the roster progression from 2024 to 2025. Why is it important to us to break it down like that? Well, first of all, the obvious, from 2022 to now, that's what they had when they got here, and that's what they have now. From 2024 to 2025 is important to me because I feel like last offseason, this last year of Giants roster building, they felt at least, and I think it's borne out by their draft classes, Nick, that they've had freedom and flexibility to finally build the roster they want. They finally feel like they're out of that hole that Dave Gettleman and the previous regime put them in. At least it seems that way to me, Nick. So without further ado, we're going to do that today. And Nick, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing excellent, man. Doing well. It's odd that I don't have to watch, 2-3 college football players. I'm in that break period, this very rare period of the year where it's like I don't have to worry too much about what's going on in the NFL world, right? You have rookie mini camps, we'll go into OTAs, and then it's that long build up the training camp, and then we're gonna start all over again. But as for right now, we're doing well, brother.
Yeah, it's funny. Like this time of year, it's so freeing from a football analysis standpoint that you find yourself with like time to do other things. Like I've just randomly, I have it open right now in a different tab. I'm randomly going back and rewatching like Jackson Dart games. Like I was rewatching Oklahoma today and just looking for little things I notice. Yeah, that was one of my favorite tapes of him in his entire career. I love how he played in that game. And I'm rewatching and I'm like, ooh, I like this. He notices this mugged up A gap pre-snap. They're sending two rushers. He catches the snap. He's deliberate. He gets the ball to the slot out immediately, on target, on time. And I'm like, ooh, I kind of like how he's one thing I do like about Dart from watching a lot more of him and rewatching and just doing a lot of analysis on him is his ability to understand where the blitz is coming from pre-snap and to replace that blitzer with where he wants to go with the football. And it's just like a natural, innate thing in my mind. Maybe it's coached up and I don't know. Maybe it's all Kiffin and I should be not crediting Dart for it, but I think it's something Daboll is going to like to work with. But this podcast is not about Jackson Dart, so let's not go down a rabbit hole of that. We have plenty of time to talk about him this offseason. Let's talk about the roster and where it was at. I think the best place to start is what they inherited in 2022 when they first got here. So we look back on the archives. Shout out to our lads. Shout out to David Syverston, who we have on the show a lot, who is a big part of our lads. They have the best depth charts in the game. If you want to go for NFL depth charts on any team, go search our lads. With that said, little quick time, Nick, before we get into this for promotion, hit the like button right now. We need your help. This is the off season. It's dead. Things are going to fall off for all content creators, ourselves included. Please help us continue to grow this show and get our subs up and get this going and rocking on the YouTube algorithm so new people can see our stuff and subscribe by hitting the like button and then leaving a comment. That's all we ever ask. Like button, comment, like button, comment. Yeah. So without further ado, let's take a look at what they inherited, Nick. Why don't you go over the offensive side of the ball for us first, and then we'll kind of break that down.
All right, Dan, this is April 1st, 2022. You're Joe Schoen, you're Brian Daboll. What does your roster look like? So your wide receiver room consists of Kenny Golladay, Kadarius Toney, Sterling Shepard. That's your 11 personnel package. And then you have Darius Slayton, mind you. Darius Slayton hardly made it through training camp. He didn't earn snaps until like week 2. It didn't appear like Darius Slayton was going to be long for this roster. Here he is off of another contract extension. How wrong were they, right? Richie James, CJ Board, Colin Johnson, Alex Bachman, and they brought in, I think, Robert Foster from Buffalo and Alabama. He had connections with Brian Daboll. So, and then you also have David Sills. I don't know if I said him, Travis Toivonen, and Austin Prohl. So those are all the wide receivers who are on the roster that the New York Giants had when Joe Schoen arrived. Important context: the 2021 offseason, the offseason before this, Dave Gettleman made a concerted effort to improve the weapons for Daniel Jones. And that concerted effort was Kadarius Toney in the first round after a trade down and Kenny Golladay. So yes, this wide receiver room is pretty bad after all those assets that were just poured in one offseason ago.
Yeah, and we'll break down each position group, and then we'll compare it to what it is now. But my, initial take on what they had at this point coming into it was Kenny Galladay, who, you know, came off that hip surgery where, I had heard, I'm not gonna, I've reported this in the past, but somebody who worked in that hospital said to the Giants doctors or Giants people, he'll never be the same after that injury. He was ultimately never the same after injury. The doctors are right. Gettleman didn't care. Gettleman had so much hubris that he thought it didn't matter, or I don't really know what led to the decision. But I think heading into this 2022 season, Galladay was already cooked. He couldn't get off the line of scrimmage with any kind of burst. That was apparent when he did try to play in 2022. So he was at essentially a wasted roster spot at this point, regardless of the salary. Darius Toney had flashes and big time moments as a rookie heading into this first year with Dable and Shane, but he also had a lot of off field baggage that we didn't know about at the time, but they knew about inheriting him. Uh, not the greatest locker room presence. From what I've heard, the teammates did not like him at all due to his work ethic, due to a lot of reasons, which have since surfaced with the Chiefs and with the Browns. Now he's out of the NFL. I think he's wrapping for a career. That's what he's doing. So we kind of knew we didn't have much there. Richie James, a little grindy type player, decent type player, had some production in 2022 with the Giants, mostly because he was playing the slot, mostly because that's the only area of the field Daniel Jones felt comfortable targeting in that offense. And Darius Slayton, who you said, at least going into it, wasn't a big part of their plans. Colin Johnson was a training camp favorite there. Really good camp, and then had a really unfortunate injury. A player both Nick and I liked on tape. Finally, David Sills, stand up Sills Army. Always good in camp, always good when before he played against NFL level defensive backs, and actually played a lot at the beginning of the year for the Giants this year, which was a microcosm of how much struggles they had at the top of the receiver room with Galladay and with Toney, two guys who they expected big things from. So that's what they had going
It
into it.
also,
Yeah.
not to cut you off, it also,
Oh,
I
go ahead.
think, was a microcosm. David Sills playing a lot in 22 was also a microcosm to what's going on with the Giants' current wide receiver room and why a player like Jalen Hyatt, who has all this flash and all this speed and all this athletic ability that we look forward to, why he can't earn snaps is because Brian
Sure.
Dable would rather you know exactly where you need to be and be there promptly and on time and be reliable in that aspect of playing wide receiver, a la David Sills, than this flashy guy who could take the top off of a defense who might not have all of those other nuances that are very vital and crucial to running and playing in a system that Brian Dable runs. So I think that's just one other area. Because remember, Kenny Galladay got benched for David Sills, like
Right.
you said, man. Like, and Galladay was cooked. Don't get me wrong, but Sills wasn't a flashy type of guy. He just understood what to do
Right.
and where to be. And Sills was earning snaps over him and Kadarius Toney.
And somehow Sills might have had more bursts off line of scrimmage at that point than Galladay had, which is really unfortunate. I remember one play, one rep that Galladay had that season. He was running a whip route, and it was arguably one of the worst whip routes I've ever seen run at the NFL level, which is really just sad. I mean, he was a phenomenal talent before the hip surgery. I have no idea why the Giants bid against themselves in that free agency. No one was offering more than a 1-year prove-it deal to Bears, and then the Giants gave him a 3-year massive contract off the hip surgery. One of the just downright stupidest decisions you'll ever see from a general manager. When you think about how bad you hate Joe Schoen and what he's done, just know it gets a lot worse. It gets comically worse. Some of Dave Gettleman's moves were comically bad, including the Galladay, including signing Kyle Rudolph after his foot surgery when he had the Liz Franken saying, well, we found out about the surgery late, but we're the Giants. We honor deals. So we're going to keep giving him that contract we offered him. These are comically bad decisions that you would see out of like a movie or some kind of like nightmare, some fan fiction nightmare that you wake up from. That's not the same for Joe Schoen. He's at least a human, a competent person. Like he's at least someone that you could say, I can't do a better job than. I don't know if that's the case with Dave Gettleman, despite the fact that he found Dexter Lawrence and Andrew Thomas. But anyway, this is not what the show's about. I would say, Nick, looking at this wide receiver room, knowing what we knew about Kenny Galladay and Kadarius Toney, this had to be the worst wide receiver room by far in the NFL. Even after the season, people thought it was bottom 10, bottom 5 once they got rid of those snaps for Galladay and once Toney was gone. But that was with Richie James. That was with Darius Slayton. But looking at it as a whole going into the year, I couldn't imagine there's a worse wide receiver room.
So much so that we kept making excuses, not you and I, but
Right.
collectively as a fan base, we kept making excuses for a quarterback who it was very apparent this wasn't a starting level quarterback, but his receivers were so bad that we kept on riding that train just because we had to acknowledge the reality of the situation that he wasn't throwing to really any elite type of players. it
And to be
really kept
clear,
us in
not with
that it kept us in that malaise, right? Where we're like,
sure.
well, if we get him a wide receiver, maybe, but it was like he still doesn't throw with anticipation. Like he still
Right.
doesn't challenge vertically. He's still reluctant to target downfield. All of these are not going to change if he has Malik Neighbors.
Right. And it's a great example of, just the importance of understanding that just because a quarterback doesn't have something around him doesn't mean that when he does get that around him, he's going to play well, because the Giants pass protection was great the first 6 weeks of last season before the Thomas injury. Neighbors was great. Slayton gets open on tape. Wandell can do a lot more than we've seen, but none of that mattered for the quarterback, because the quarterback can't play on time. He can't throw with anticipation. He doesn't see the field well post snap. He locks onto reads, and he can't really process anything pre snap. There's no checks. He doesn't not really control the protections. Just all the things that require you to be a good quarterback that don't require receiver play were not available to the Giants. So those things have to be settled first before you can worry about receivers. It's a big reason I'm happy the Giants didn't waste any of their high capital picks on receivers this year. And I wouldn't say waste, but use. But as we look at this year, Nick, where we're at now, a wide receiver room of Malik Neighbors, Darius Slayton, Wandell Robinson, Jalen Hyatt, and then maybe some flyer types like Will Jordan Humphrey and Zach Pascal, potentially Gabe Davis if the Giants make that decision to sign him for cheap. I wouldn't say this is the best wide receiver room in the NFL. I would say, though, with a player like Malik, I'll make my case now, Nick, and I want to hear your opinion on this. I think Malik Neighbors is already, at minimum, one of the 10 best receivers in the NFL on tape. I would probably argue it's better than that. To me, it's like top 5. Now, that's crazy to some fans to hear. People are going to think that's wild. If you look at the advanced metrics, yards per route run, and some of the data that, Fantasy Points data does a great job with, True Media, Jacob Gibbs, shout out to him. He's put this out there. He's like top 1 or top 2 in all those marks. And if you look at what Warren Sharp tweeted out recently, Nick, he was the best receiver. He was the receiver who was hurt most by quarterback play of any wide receiver in the NFL last season. And the tape showed that. The tape proved that with Malik Neighbors. So much more production. He already had a ton of production, insane levels of production. So much more was available to him, but stolen away by poor quarterback play throughout the season. So I'm already willing to say top 5 for me personally. So when you have someone like that on your offense, which they didn't have in Tony or they didn't have in Galladay that season, to me, it makes a difference in the room. Darius Slayton's a better receiver now than he was then, and I think he gets open on film. Wandell remains to be seen. Hyatt remains to be seen. I would say with Neighbors bringing the room up, this is more of a league average type receiver room.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree with it being a league average. You don't have that like that. I think Darius Slayton's a reliable number 2. But when we look around the National Football League and you see some of the top wide receiver rooms, you look at number 2s like T. Higgins. You look at number 2s like, I don't know if Jordan Addison is there yet, but Justin Jefferson is a top receiver in the league, and Jordan Addison complements him very well. I think league average is fair because I don't think it's below average. And I think all of the starters in an 11 personnel package for Malik Neighbors, Darius Slayton, and Wandell Robinson are respectable NFL starters in the National Football League. And when's the last time we have been able to say that about the New York Giants 11 personnel package?
True.
Other than last year, of course, because it was the same 3. So it's been a while since that's been the case. So, but I think league average, I would say, I don't have them all in front of me, so I am completely diarrheaing out of my mouth right now. But I'll say this, it's probably somewhere between like 15 to 12, maybe.
I think that's fair. And we're going to do that for all the positions. We're not going to go
Yeah.
through 32, but it's fair. We know the NFL. Nick and I study the NFL at crazy depth. We put an insane amount of time in during the season and the off season for our jobs, this one and mostly what we do outside of this work. So I'm okay with that. With that said, breaking it down, Nick, from the perspective of how did this position group evolve on the roster? I like the fact that the Giants have really not made any major investments in this position group except for Malik Neighbors. The reason I like that is that I am of the belief that to win in the NFL, you need trench play and you need quarterback play. I think wide receiver is among the most overrated positions to invest in premium capital in the NFL. And I think it's borne out throughout the history of the NFL through the teams that have won and the teams that have lost. And the reason being is because so much of wide receiver play is dependent on the quarterback. No other position, I don't think, is more dependent on another position than wide receivers are to quarterbacks. And I don't even particularly think it's anywhere close. You can make the case some corners are dependent on a good pass rush. That's fine. You can make the case that quarterbacks are dependent on the offensive line. That's fine. I agree to that. But even so, that's not one position. That's 5 positions right there. Even then, I've seen great quarterbacks overcome mediocre offensive lines. I have not seen too many examples of great wide receivers overcoming mediocre quarterback play or even worse quarterback play. Quarterback is responsible for reading a defense pre to post snap. A quarterback is responsible for seeing the field. A quarterback is responsible for throwing with anticipation and throwing to a spot where the receiver is going to be not where he is right now. Without any of that, the receiver cannot produce.
Yeah.
So ultimately, while I am thinking they haven't invested all that much in this group over the 3 years, besides their one major play in Neighbors, to me, quite frankly, I'm okay with it. All these guys can produce if they have great quarterback play.
I agree. I mean, Malik Neighbors did not receive great quarterback play last year, and you could argue that he produced. He had 109 catches for over 1,200 yards with 7 touchdowns. Now, imagine if you had
Right.
not Josh Allen, but league average quarterback play. Imagine if he had 2023 Kirk Cousins or something
Right.
like that, right? 2022 Kirk Cousins, let's go with, right? 2022, right? So, we're looking at a much better wide receiver room than the Giants obviously inherited. Well, than Joe Schoen and Brian Dable obviously inherited. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Look, we all love to work out. The summer's coming around. You want to look good in your bathing suit. But in order to enhance your workout, you want to go and use MitoPure from Timeline. This is a great product. When I started using it, it makes me feel stronger, gives me more energy. I recover quicker. I'm in my 30s. I still have the energy to work out. And if you want that energy, you really should give Timeline's MitoPure a shot and work it into your routine. The great year of 2025 is your year to be the best, most energized, most revitalized you. MitoPure promotes cellular renewal and mitochondrial health to address common signs of aging at the root. MitoPure is the research-backed innovation that unlocks your fullest potential. Timeline is offering 10% off your order of MitoPure right now. So go to timeline.com/banter. It's timeline.com/banter. That's TIMELINE.
Yeah, and a room that they didn't invest much in from a premium capital standpoint. Let's take a look before we get to offensive line. We'll probably wrap up there. Let's take a look at the quarterback room in 2022, the Giants that they inherited. They inherited Daniel Jones. I believe, did they sign Tyrod Taylor? It says he's here in April, but that's because I should have done before March. I really screwed up on these dates, but I really should have done.
It's fine. Yeah. Tyrod Taylor was not here. Mike Glennon had just left the New York Giants.
Okay.
He played a lot in 2021. Remember 2021?
So they just had Jones essentially on the roster.
Jake Fromm too. They decided not to bring back. So it was really just Daniel Jones. And then this regime added Tyrod Taylor. And then they brought in Brian Lewerke, the former Michigan State quarterback. And they brought back Davis Webb, who acted as like a quarterback / coach who would come in preseason and light up teams. And he did that week 17 game. He also did as well. And Kenny Golladay had his only touchdown as a New York Giant.
Oh, yeah.
The Eagles.
I do remember that touchdown catch. But yeah, we look at as it translates to now, Nick, the Giants have Russell Wilson, former Super Bowl quarterback, MVP, Super Bowl MVP, I believe. They have Jameis Winston, and they have Jackson Dart. I think it's unequivocally the case that this quarterback room has massively improved. Now, massive might be an overstatement. Let me just say improved for now. Dart remains a question mark at the NFL level. Russell Wilson is an aging player, clearly better on film than a player like Daniel Jones without even any. You shouldn't even be able to argue. It shouldn't even be an argument. It's so obvious on tape, and not even on tape, and the raw stats and the advanced stats, just about any way you can make that case. And then Jameis Winston, a player that you and I both like more than consensus, but we understand his limitations and his drawbacks and his flaws. It's tough to upgrade this position. You could have 3 years, Nick. You could have 5 years. You could have 15 years as a GM, and you might not have a real opportunity to upgrade this position. But I think given the resources they've had, the positions they've been in, they've done a good job. Now, some would argue, Nick, they didn't because they should have taken Michael Penix or they should have taken Bo Nix over Neighbors last year instead of doing this move for Dart. But to me, I'll be quite frank with you. I think Jackson Dart is at least on the level of a prospect as a Bo Nix and a Michael Penix. Penix is the one I could understand the case for saying he's a different level prospect because his arm talent is at a different level. But there are other aspects of Penix's game that are drawbacks without a doubt. I don't find him. I know he ran a good 40 time. I don't think he's going to be a mobile quarterback at the NFL level. And by mobile, I mean in pocket mobility. lateral agility. I understand he can run in a straight line fast, but can you maneuver the pocket? Can you get in and out of sacks? That's something I have a question about him moving forward, in addition to his age and injury history. Jackson Dart can grow more into his frame than a Michael Penix can. So I really would argue, Nick, that he is on the level of those prospects that they could have taken. Now, JJ, that's one that you might be able to say was a different level than Jackson Dart, and they passed on him for Malik Neighbors. But I'd even argue that there are aspects of Jackson Dart's game I like. I think he's a much more natural thrower of the football, man. I know that JJ had velocity, but there were some aspects of JJ throwing the football that really scared me and bothered me. And quite frankly, I like Jackson Dart's frame a lot more for the NFL, a lot more than that lengthy McCarthy frame that he has. Maybe he can grow into it. I don't know. So I'd say he's on par with all those guys. So I don't really know what they missed on at quarterback. They never had an opportunity to draft May. They never had an opportunity to draft Jaden or Caleb. And quite frankly, they didn't really have an opportunity to draft anyone in 2022.
No, we just wanted the Giants, and by we, I just mean the Giants fan base, the part of the Giants fan base who have been clamoring for quarterbacks, rightfully, right? I would just contend that it really depends on the opportunity, and then what you're foregoing in making or acting upon that opportunity, right? So going with or skipping out on JJ McCarthy, Michael Penix, and Bo Nix, and going with Malik Neighbors. But then 1 year later, you follow up and you get Jackson Dart. It's like, that's the opportunity right now. So at least now Joe Schoen has actually took a real cut. Now you're 1 more year behind the development, if you want to look at it that way. But as you and I have propounded the idea that I think this is Joe Schoen and Brian Dable. Like, if you were to ask me 2 months ago, is Joe Schoen and Brian Dable going to have a job in 2025 or 2026? I would have said no. Now I'm like, yeah, they probably will. I think this is a 2-year extension, basically, that is not put out there by John Mara. So they at least took the swing now. So now we can see what this quarterback guru, this coach, what he can do now that the swing is actually ensued. And that's, I think, assuaged a lot of the concerns about the Giants not taking that swing that permeated New York Giants Twitter prior to this draft.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you said there. And again, I don't really view those guys as a higher level prospect than a Jackson Dart, if at all.
I would say they're in a similar bucket, right?
Yeah, right.
But again, I think you did a good job mentioning the Michael Penix, but there were drawbacks, the age, the injuries, all that kind of shit. But yeah, I think overall you made a very good case there.
And to be fair, that doesn't mean he's going to be as good. Like, Bo Nix has already proved it at the NFL level right now over a full course of a season. That's not something Jackson Dart has done yet.
No, 100%. Bo Nix, he deserves respect, right? He deserves the respect because he had a really good rookie season. Michael Penix, he showed flashes. I think a lot of people are already kind of like putting that out there like that's a win. I'm not quite there yet. And then JJ had the unfortunate injury, so we have to wait and see. Give it a little bit of time to see if these guys can do this consistently.
Agreed. All right, let's take a look at some other position groups as I go back now to the March 2022 roster before free agency. The Giants had Saquon Barkley on their roster. This is a funny one that I don't know if you remember. Devontae Booker. Remember they signed him for a decent sized deal. What the fuck was Gettleman doing that?
Devontae Booker was kind of nice though, man.
Bro, you can get these running backs in the draft for $800K.
I got you. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I don't want to disrespect Booker. It's not his fault. He got this kind. He's got to take what he's going to get. But you're right.
But we had Barkley on the roster. Like, what is Gettleman doing? And then Antonio Williams. Now the Giants have Tyrone Tracy. They have Cam Scattaboo. They have Dante Turbo Miller. I didn't call him Dante. It is Dante Turbo Miller.
It is Dante.
I'm like blanking on stuff. And then they have Devin Singletary. Very different kind of running back room.
And and Cammy.
Yeah, and Scattaboo. I said Scattaboo earlier. And they have a very different kind of running back room. I would say, obviously, the running back room was better in 2022 because Saquon Barkley is that good and that phenomenal. But the evolution of the roster is what we're focusing on today. And they've made it clear that in their mind, this is a position that you win via roster building through the draft. You get these guys in 3rd round. You get these guys, well, in the Giants case, you get them in the 4th round and the 5th round, where their contracts are 500, 600,000 against the cap, 700,000 against the cap. I think they moved it up, 800,000 in that range for 4 years. That's per year versus 15 million per year or something like that. And you use that 15 million that you're saving, or the 14 million, whatever it is for Barkley. I don't know his exact contract details. I know he got re-upped by the Eagles this offseason. You use that to improve your offensive line. Use that to sign a corner like a Debo or a safety like Holland. You fill out probable starters and advantage players that we hope Adebo and Holland can be for the Giants. We'll find out soon if that's the case. And then you find young talent at running back like Tracy, who they obviously slam dunk hit on. And hopefully like Cam Scatterboo, who I think me and you are very highly confident or at least bullish on the idea of them hitting on him. So it's a different idea. It's a different mindset, but it's how I personally in the modern salary cap era would like to build out a roster. So I love to see the evolution of this roster at running back, despite it being worse in 2025 than 2022.
I agree. I think you laid that out very well, Dan. And you also have two cost-effective contracts now for presumably reliable players, depending on how you view Cam Scatterboo. I think a lot of us view him highly. So you have two guys. One of them goes down. You're not in this absolute frenzy like the
True.
Giants were in the past. Every time Saquon Barkley got injured,
Good
you have
point.
another reliable guy, and you still have Eric Gray. I don't know if he's long for the roster, and then a different type of running back, a different style of running back who I think has a ton of upside in Dante Turbo Miller if he ever finds the field, plus special teams value. So yes, you're right. Saquon Barkley is better than all those players, and Saquon Barkley's presence makes the running back room better as well. But the process of how the Giants, the decisions the Giants made to get to this point, I appreciate. And I think it also led to a more healthy roster in general. So I'm right there with you.
I love the point you made too about the injury front. It's a position that gets injured a lot in the NFL, maybe more than any other position. And they were in tough spots at times when Barkley had his injuries. I can think of a few. And now it's a different situation. They have depth behind Tracy, who we presume to be the starter. We don't even know if that's the case, right? Like they're the lead back. Yeah. Like it may end up being Cam. Like if Cam is as good as I think he could be, he may just command touches in this offense. He certainly dealt with a workload at Arizona State and handled it insanely well. So we'll see. Either way, it's a good problem to have, having too much talent and too many options and depth at the position they previously haven't had it at. So again, may not be as good of a room overall, but I like the evolution and I'm happy about it. Let's now take a look at the entire offensive line. This is always fun to do, Nick. All right.
Hog mollies, baby. Hog mollies.
Hog mollies. That was Dave Gettleman's idea. And this is some funny names on here. Let's start with the big one. Left tackle. And I went back to March now. Andrew Thomas, left tackle. Left guard on the roster prior to this point was Matt Skura and Ben Bredesen. Those were their options for left guard. Center, this is the funniest one of all. Oh, Dave. Oh, Dave, the panic trade before the start of the season. He trades BJ Hill, a legitimately great rotational defensive tackle for the Giants. Even at that point, he wasn't as great as he was on the Bengals. I agree. He played his best football at the Bengals. That's fine to admit. But man, he was playing good as a rotational piece. He was somebody valuable to your roster, and you just panic trade him for Billy Price, who the Bengals would have certainly cut. A pure bust at the center position. Injuries killed his career, maybe, but he just wasn't good at the center position. That was our starter at center, bro. Going into the offseason, at least. It was before we got Feliciano. So we had Price. They had to work with that. They had Will Hernandez to work with at right guard, who was on his way out. And they had Nate Solder still to work with at right tackle. Devery Hamilton as well was their tackle depth, in addition to Corey Cunningham. This is arguably outside of Andrew Thomas, one of the worst offensive lines I've seen on paper, besides the Eric Flowers, Bobby Hart line.
Besides the Eric Flowers, Bobby Hart line. Now, would you believe me if I told you that the general manager who assembled that offensive line, his calling card and what he preached was hog mollies?
Yeah, I would believe it because it's the life and reality we live in. And he tried, man. He signed the guy from Jacksonville who sucked, that guard who I forget his name now. Patrick had to cut in season, Omame. Nate Solder traded for Billy Price. You know, he did all
drafted
these.
Will Hernandez. Drafted
Will Hernandez.
Thomas.
Right. Yeah. Traded for Ben Bredesen. He did a lot. He preached what he promised. He just sucked at doing it.
Well, it's that, and it's also there was a lack of continuity with the coaching staff and development. Right. And at that point, he had two separate head coaches, Pat Shermer and Hal Hunter. And then he went from Joe Judge. And we remember the fiasco that was Joe Judge's inability to keep an offensive line coach. Right. Whether it was Rob Sale, which was the later one, but it started with Mark Colombo from from Dallas, and then he ends up getting into an altercation with Joe Judge. So the Giants have to go out and
Right.
get Dave DiGuglielmo. So the offensive line was
That
never
was crazy. I
stable.
forgot about that.
And this is why this is important. It stifled the development of Andrew Thomas a little bit, but Andrew
Right.
Thomas was able to stabilize. I don't know if Thomas was working with somebody outside of the New York Giants organization, but the Giants organization was so dysfunctional that it could have possibly ruined the career of someone like Andrew Thomas, who we see how naturally talented and gifted he is. And that's what shitty, bad football teams do.
You're
That's a terrible
100%
place to be in. And to go back to the Billy Price trade, not to rehash this, I want to say you and I both supported it. And the reason why was not because we believed that Billy Price was worth BJ Hill. We liked BJ Hill a lot, but we acknowledged the fact that the Giants had Dexter Lawrence, who we were very high on at that time. And I know that sounds stupid right now, but back then, not everybody was back in 2021. We had Leonard Williams. We had a stable defensive line. We weren't going to resign BJ Hill. So we were like, we need offensive linemen. Billy Price sucks, but you need to do something if we're going to enter the 2021 season in an attempt to compete with Jason Garrett being retained as our offensive coordinator, who got canned after that Kansas City Chiefs game, right? So it was just organizationally, we were such a tire fire that now I look at the Giants and I'm like, wow, we are so much more stable. Like reflecting back on the past is sometimes a good thing, especially when you host this type of podcast like this, where you and I have talked endlessly about this type of shit. That stuff was wildly bad.
Right.
So bad. And it was all because of desperation. It was all because the Giants were trying to patch up these wounds. They were just trying to like stuff the wounds with gauze when you really needed to freaking put a tourniquet on the leg to stop the bleeding and actually rebuild. Well, the Giants never really went into a full rebuild, but right now the roster is at least respectable, and there seems to be a stability that was devoid back when Dave Gettleman was here. So that is one thing that I do appreciate about what Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll have going on.
It's truly an excellent point by you, Nick, because I think about it now. The Giants haven't made that many, if any, panic moves under Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll. I don't even know what you would look at. They didn't force a quarterback in their mind last year. They drafted a guy they really liked this year. They haven't put themselves in a position where they needed to really force any position, in my mind, in free agency. Looking back at their signings, you could maybe say Glowinski, but they probably liked Glowinski at the time, even though they were probably desperate for a guard. They didn't do any of these like last second trades or like last second decisions, like let's draft Sam Beal with our 3rd round draft pick in the supplemental draft, which is going to end up being like a top 65 or 70 pick for the Giants because we were a bad team, like Gettleman did. They didn't do anything like that or any of these trades. So like, it's just a different mindset, as bad as they have been, and they deserve blame. And we were on the bandwagon of letting them go last offseason. They are more competent. They have a better process. Now, process has to lead to results, and we're at that point now. But when you do stuff like what the Giants were doing, those panic type moves, you really put yourself in such a hole, and you leave yourself almost no way to improve as a roster, both short and long term. And so it's good to look back at this and just see what that line, that line was just, they inherited devastatingly bad offensive line. It's not just like, they had Andrew Thomas. Great. They inherited that. That was good to have. Like any GM would want to inherit that. But when you look at those other 4 positions, it was nothing. They didn't have any prospects. They didn't have any depth. They didn't have any starters. They didn't have any hope at all at that point with any of the guys I mentioned besides Bredesen, who they traded for and maybe had a little bit of hope for, but was still a day 3 draft pick, not somebody you have massive hope for. And that's one player, and you need 3 other players to fill out an offensive line. So it was really a crazy point. Now, looking ahead, Nick, to where they are now, Andrew Thomas is the left tackle. John Runyon is their left guard. John Michael Schmitz is their center. Greg Van Roten is going to compete with Evan Neal. They actually have a full competition for right guard. Jermaine Illuminor, a really great surprise signing for what he put out there on tape, is their right tackle. They have some tackle depth, if you want to call it that, with James Hudson and Stone Forsythe. They went out, they got these players. They have Marcus Bowe, who they drafted, who they believe can start at tackle and play tackle, but he's depth for tackle or guard. Aaron Stinney is some depth at guard. Schlottman, maybe we can consider him depth, but Stinney at least played a little bit, so I have a little more hope there. And then a player who we haven't talked about a lot, but we try to mention as much as we can, Jake Kubis, who they really like behind the scenes as a potential developmental player for them at guard. So they have more depth now. They have better starters across the board, in my opinion, with the exception of Thomas. Like, I can't think of one position that's not in a better spot. Even disappointing players to me, like John Michael Schmitz, are so much better than a Billy Price at that point. So it's look, it's been a steady progress for them. It hasn't proven itself on the field over the course of a season. They had a 6-game stretch we really appreciated last year on tape, and we talked about it and we broke it down. There's still a lot of question marks, but man, it seems to be in a better position than it was then.
It does. It does. Let's so that's all the offense except for tight end, correct?
Yes.
All right. So tight ends going back to 2022 in March. What were we looking at, Dan?
Kyle Rudolph.
Okay.
Remember, I brought it up earlier. One of the
He was not retained. He was not retained by Schoen and Dable.
Right. This is what they inherited, an opportunity to retain him if they wanted to. Evan Ingram, if they wanted to retain him.
Not retained.
Not retained. So 2 guys they let walk. Chris Myrick and Jake Hausman.
So, yeah, Myrick was retained. He played with the Giants that next year. And Hausman, I think, was until a certain point as well. But the Giants, I mean, we know and we've discussed how Joe Schoen and Brian Dable want that type of tight end. We saw what they did after the 2022 season when they went out and they got Darren Waller. It didn't work out, but we understand the process. But if we go back to 2022, how they were able to fix this pretty significantly bad roster was they bring in Ricky Seals-Jones, who ends up getting hurt early, and he doesn't end up playing. And Ricky Seals-Jones kind of fits the archetype of what a Lawrence Cager is, right? Like this former wide receiver who goes out there a little bit more athletic, not as much of a blocker, but he doesn't, but Lawrence Cager ends up fulfilling that during the season. But the Giants, man, they were just patchworking stuff. Daniel Bellinger was a huge get for them on day 3, who played a significant role. They get Tanner Hudson, the kid who's now with the Bengals, and he played a big role for the Giants as well early in that season. So it's funny how they were just trying to figure out tight. Like, I think they went into the season of 2022 like, yo, we're just going to figure out tight end, right? Like, we just need to.
Yes.
They had a plan. A lot of them got injured. They were left nothing. And Daniel Bellinger filled a very important role for them. And now we still see them building upon that, even up until this draft where they took the Fedone kid out of Nebraska. And you already have Theo Johnson from last year, and you have Chris Meyer. It's just funny to see the evolution of this tight end position over the years, because they were left nothing. A rookie stepped up in 2022, and then they had a bunch of veterans that they patchwork together. They go out, they get the superstar Darren Waller. That doesn't work out, and they realize, oh, we got the superstar, but we still need to block at this position. We can't just have Daniel Bellinger being the only guy who can block. So what do we do? Let's sign Jack Stoll and Chris Manhertz and draft Theo Johnson, and now we'll be able to block and we'll be able to receive. And the Giants have stuck to that. And I look at their tight end room, and I'm like, this is a pretty damn good tight end room. It might not have star power, might not have that top end talent, Dan, but it's a damn good tight end room, and I'm happy about that.
I think you're right about that. It has the pieces we like and the pieces we believe can contribute to the offense, maybe if not be a star, though I do think Theo has more upside than
potential.
A lot of
yeah, for sure.
Potential. It's all potential.
Yeah.
But again, remember John Schmelk we had on the show. He said behind the scenes, that's the player they're most excited about. I could see it from the end of the year tape. But I do want to say, Nick, things will get better as far as what Joe Schoen and Brian Dable inherited when we get to the defense side of the ball. But looking back, as we've now gone through every position on offense, it's almost insane to think about how little they inherited on the offensive side of the ball. And, you know, we've had these really bad offenses for the 3 years of Brian Dable and Joe Schoen. Some of it has been quarterback play. Most of it has been in our mind. But, man, it's not all that when you think about just where they started. They were started with almost nothing at wide receiver besides Darius Slayton. They started with nothing, literally nothing at tight end, because they let the 2 guys walk that they didn't want to sign long-term. So they're starting from scratch at tight end, near scratch at wide receiver. They had a running back. They started from near scratch at every single position on the offensive line except for one. This is insane, dude. They had nothing to work with. How the hell could a roster be that bad on offense going into an offseason? I think if you look back, I would be shocked if any roster in the history of football was worse on the offensive side of the ball heading into the 2022 offseason than the Giants were. It's hard to imagine, but that's what happens when you swing and miss on a Solder, when you swing and miss on an Omame, when you swing and miss on a Golladay, when you swing and miss on a Kadarius Toney, when you swing and miss on every single player besides Andrew Thomas and Darius Slayton on the off, and I guess Saquon Barkley, it was 2 overall. How do you miss on the offensive side of the ball? And so it's a little bit more manageable for me, in my head at least, to understand how long it's taken for this offense to get better when I consider what they inherited.
It was not good. It was not great, Dan. But that's the offense. You can see right now the New York Giants have a much more competitive offense, a much better offense overall in 2025 than they did in 2022 prior to the draft or after the draft. I mean, this is the best offense the Giants have had since in the Joe Schoen era.
On paper, yeah.
right? Like you have to imagine just our offensive line, like every stamp, like what area of the roster is worse on offense? You can only maybe argue running
Running back.
back. And
Yeah.
that's just because the Giants had a top 2 pick as a running back who is one of the best running backs in the National Football League, and he is no longer on the roster. But I still go into the season thinking the running back room is stable enough and fine
Right.
enough, and that's not a slight at all. Like it's an NFL running back room, right?
Even has excitement in it. Tyron Tracy was exciting. He had a lot of explosive big plays last year. Cam Scadaboo is going to be an exciting player for this football team. So there's excitement. And we already know as analysts, or not know, but believe that a lot of the run game is dependent on the blocking anyway. So we're going to see if the Giants can improve that. The rest of it will come together. Now let's look at the defense. And by the way, for this exercise, we're going to skip doing the 2024 to 2025. We might do that another day, but this is just turning into a longer show, so we don't want to make it too long. So let's break down the defense in 3 parts. We're going to break it down as the defensive front. That includes the defensive line, Nick, and the outside backers. We're going to break it down as the second level. That's our off-ball linebackers, and then the secondary. So let's start with the defensive front. Here's what they inherited in March when they agreed to take the jobs. They inherited Leonard Williams, Raymond Johnson III, Danny Shelton, Austin Johnson, Dexter Lawrence, Quincy Roche, Lorenzo Carter, Cam Brown, and Aziz Ojulari and O'Shane Zimenez. So these are the guys they had. Let's talk about them
I
first.
love that. I got you to say O'Shane Zimenez again.
That's what it is.
Yeah,
Zimenez.
you always that's what
Just
you
kidding.
nah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Giants defensive line back then, it wasn't bad, right? Like you had Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence. This is before the Dexter Lawrence massive breakout in 2022. But you and I, we were saying, yo, this guy is legit. This guy could be a top 5 talent at this position group. You still had Lenny playing his ass off. And but then you had a bunch of like wild cards, right? Like the Austin Johnson, the Giants signed him on a short deal, and he ended up leveraging his play here because he had a good season with the Giants, and he went over to I think the Chargers and signed a pretty big deal over there. I was like, oh, nice, Austin Johnson. He signed, he's gone. But like Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence, that was the meat and the potatoes. And then what ended up happening? The Giants went out and they got like Justin Ellis, I think, and he didn't work out at all. They signed Jihad Ward. Remember David Moa? Remember him? And like, yes. So they ended up, and they still had Raymond Johnson the third, but I don't think he did anything during the 2022 season. Didn't do much, and they brought in Quincy Roche as well. But yeah, overall, if we want to look at it now, if we're just focusing on the defensive line was better probably in 2022 because they had Leonard Williams on it, right?
So this is just the defensive line you're saying, or you're going to say,
and again, this is why this is an interesting conversation because none of this should be evaluated solely in a vacuum. You need to look at the collective when it comes to it, especially because these defenses are completely different. The defense that Patrick Graham ran is different than the defense Shane Bowen runs, and that's also very different from what Don Wink Martindale ran as well.
Yeah, but as far as front goes, like let's just look at it like, for example, like Leonard, Dex, and then put like a third guy in there, like an Austin Johnson for the interior guys, or you can put in Shelton, whoever you like. And then versus like what they have as the outside rushers. It's Lorenzo Carter, it's Aziz Ojulari, it's O'Shane, and it's Cam Brown. Now that's versus what they have now. I think they're in a much better position. Sure, there's a downgrade from Leonard Williams to Darius Alexander, and that's obvious. But outside of that, man, we're talking about Abdul Carter instead of those pass rushers. Kayvon Thibodeau, even in my opinion, is better than any of those pass rushers as far as what I'm looking for. Maybe Aziz, you can argue, but Aziz is injured all the time and he doesn't play the run. He plays the run much worse than Kayvon Thibodeau. And then obviously Brian Burns as well. Like those are 3 massive, massive upgrades right there.
Danny Shelton played 256 snaps. Remember when the Giants signed him from Detroit to get that big run stopper behind?
I thought he'd be good for us.
I think I drank that Kool-Aid a little bit too. Just as like a 3rd or 4th defensive lineman, but it was rough. It was pretty rough. Austin Johnson was solid though. He had 21 pressures that year. I think like 3 sacks. I
like Austin Johnson.
Yeah, he was fine. Like again though, it was still like it had been downgraded from the previous seasons because prior to this, the Giants had BJ Hill, and then prior to that, the Giants had BJ Hill and Dalvin Tomlinson and Leonard Williams, and a young Dexter Lawrence, and it's like, yo, this defensive line,
I didn't even get to inherit the best of what Gettleman had to offer on the defensive front.
No, well, at that time too, the Giants were really weak at edge. That's one of the reasons why we were so we were beyond okay with the Giants selecting even an Azeez Ojulari in the first round that year, because we
Right.
understood that this draft, if the Giants were to trade back, getting Azeez, but he had that degenerative knee, which I mean maybe speaks to one of the reasons why he has all these injury issues. But he's a
Sure.
talented enough player. You needed edge rushers, and in 2022, the Giants obviously drafted Kayvon Thibodeau, so they acknowledge that as well. But who the hell were the Giants edge rushers back in 2021? It was Azeez Ojulari, who played well, right? And then you had O'Shane Ximenez, Lorenzo Carter, who I still believe in his talent, but he was coming off of an Achilles injury.
Right.
Ellerson Smith and Quincy Roche and Raymond Johnson. Like, what are we talking about, right?
I know. It's insane. The upgrade the Giants have made, the evolution of this roster from now until then, they've really made this priority to get pass rushers on this roster. And they haven't sacrificed too much on the defensive front, given what they inherited. Sure, like at the peak they did, because they lost out on Hill and all those guys you mentioned, but those guys weren't there when they took over this roster. They already traded or cut, whatever it may be. So they lost Leonard Williams, but Darius Alexander is a player we really like and think has a lot of upside at the NFL level. And then the upgrade that they've made for the edge rushers, it's insane, really.
That's why, like, I agree. We shouldn't just look at this as just the defensive line, because if you just look at the front in general, we'll group in the linebackers too, right? Like, this is the core of the run defense. Obviously, contained defenders from the secondary and alley defenders are very important to run defense. Right. They have vital roles. But let's just look at the meat of the run defense. That defensive line, those edge rushers that we just went over from 2022, and then the linebackers. And the linebackers in 2022, you had Blake Martinez, another Stanford guy, coming off of a great year from the New York Giants. 2 years prior to this, I believe. And I think he slowed down in 2021, if I'm not mistaken, was injured a little bit. And then you had freaking Tay Crowder and Carter Coughlin, and TJ Brunson. You know, like,
very weak. Get to the off-ball linebackers as they're,
it's bad.
I mean, I would argue, looking at it, no position group has improved more on this roster than the inside bat and then the off-ball linebackers. And that's not even to say the Giants have great off-ball linebackers now and Okereke, McFadden, but Tay Crowder was one of the fact that a GM decided to put Tay Crowder as their main off-ball inside linebacker.
Who was it?
A GM.
No, Tay Crawford. Remember that?
Oh, he got his name wrong once, didn't he?
He called him Tate Crawford.
His own player. But like those Tate Crowder games on tape, I remember them, Nick, and I remember being a little harsh on him. Unfortunately, he's a nice guy. I'm sure he's a good human. Those were some of the worst inside linebackers. To have him responsible for what he was responsible for on a football field was malpractice by not the coaching staff, by the GM. The coaching staff was left no option. What were they going to do? Put slow-ass Reggie Ragland in that row, sign like some asshole from a practice squad? Like, they did not put any resources into this off-ball position at all. Not even like a fifth-round developmental pick like a McFadden or sign an Okereke in free agency. They did nothing, and they paid the price for having those two guys on the field a lot.
Dude, Tay Crowder in 2021 played over 1,000 snaps on
defense. Yes, that's what they inherited.
Yes.
That's exactly what Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll inherited. It doesn't, like, no offense. I mean, I think he's out of the NFL now. I don't know.
I think he's on the Titans. I was like a 90-man guy.
Teamer or something. Like, he never should have been a starting inside linebacker playing 1,000 snaps.
No, he shouldn't. And the Giants brought in Micah McFadden, obviously, during the Joe Schoen era in that first draft, and they signed Bobby Okereke after that first season. That in and of itself is much better than this iteration of the Giants linebacking core. Because again, Blake Martinez was a good player, but then he started falling off. And then Blake Martinez started being like, I don't know if I want to play football. And then I think he was retained up until about the summer, and then he retired or something like odd happened with how he exited his time with the New York Giants. But he was a stud for that first year after Dave Gettleman signed him. And yeah, no, just a tough linebacker room in the sense of, like, you don't want to be in that situation like if you're the general manager. So the Giants did a very good job upgrading the defensive front, especially when they arguably have the best pass rush in the league right now. If you look at the edge rushers, on paper, they're edge rushers. Like they're three pitches at edge rusher is Brian Burns, Abdul Carter, and Kayvon Thibodeau.
Wow.
They're three pitches back in 2021. O'Shane Ximenez, Azeez Ojulari, and who? Quincy Roche?
And Roche.
Like, come on. What are we talking about, dude?
It's crazy.
Talking about Nolan Ryan and then some schmuck who got to pitch once and then just got battered by the offense.
I didn't expect, man, going into this exercise, I didn't expect the roster to be as bad as it was for what they inherited after that last 2021 year. It's almost unfathomable how bad of a roster they inherited when I thought offense was going to be the end of it. there's also another position group on the other side of the ball at off-ball linebacker that was ungodly bad from a talent standpoint. And not to be mean to these guys, but just to accept the reality of the situation.
Now, this is where we get interesting, though. I agree
Yeah, the
100%
secondary is
with
going to
you
be
there.
I saw
The
it too.
secondary is interesting because there is a very good argument. There's a good argument that Dave Gettleman did a better job with the secondary. And these guys are some of these guys are homegrown talents, not the two major ones at cornerback. But let's start with it, man. The April 1st, 2022, he had a rough season in 2021, but he had Pro Bowl years prior to that. James Bradbury. Starting opposite of him, Adoree Jackson, who the Giants ended up retaining, and he played last year. So that's a solid 1-2 back in 2022. Adoree Jackson, James Bradbury. And then
Nickel, though,
behind them, nickel was Darnay Holmes.
that was a problem.
And then Aaron Robinson. So two guys, Aaron Robinson, look, I think you go back to his college tape, he wasn't a bad football player. Wasn't.
Yeah,
He was a physical football
unlucky.
player
That
too.
injury, that knee injury was so unfortunate.
Yeah, that sucks for him, man. That's not his fault. I'm not even going to put that at Gettleman either.
Me
It's
either.
just one of those freak things, and it sucks. But you have some players there, some veteran players who are solid. And then when you look at the safeties, two guys that Dave Gettleman drafted, one in the second round who I think played well above being a second round pick in Xavier
Sure.
McKinney, and then one in the fourth round in Julian Love, who I believe played well above being a fourth round pick
Sure.
in Julian Love. So those are two hits to Dave Gettleman's credit. But there really wasn't anybody behind them. Like it was Jaron Williams and Rodarius Williams, and that's it. Like there was no depth. A lot of those guys had vacated
Right.
and left already. This is the April 1st, because I don't have the March one in front of me. Is there anybody else in March that you want to acknowledge from the depth chart that
they inherited? I mean, at a corner, I mean, the March one has Logan Ryan on there ahead of Julian Love. He was eventually released, I believe, by the Joe Schoen era. And yeah, it's interesting to me, Nick, because I think we have to look at what they inherited. At the time of inheriting it, maybe James Bradbury wasn't the player that Paulson Adebo is right now. That's a case that can be made. I don't know.
Yeah.
And you could definitely say that Adoree Jackson was a better player that year going into that next year, 2022, than what Deonte Banks is right now. You could say Xavier McKinney is a better player than Tyler Nubin or even Javon Holland right now. You could say Julian Love is a better player than Holland or Nubin. I'm a bit skeptical of it. I appreciate Love for everything he was. I know he made the Pro Bowl last year with Seattle, but I find him to be a little bit of an overrated player personally, just from the tape I saw of him with the Giants. And I don't know exactly what led to him making the Pro Bowl last year. If I watched the tape and he was a much better player than he was with the Giants, I'm willing to accept it. But I personally am perfectly fine with trading him out for a Nubin or for a Javon Holland. Now, the big thing that interests me, though, Nick, from a roster evolution standpoint when it comes to these two positions in the secondary overall, is just how they went about it. Like you just said,
one more
best.
player I think we
Go ahead.
should acknowledge. Jabril Peppers too.
Peppers was on there before the injuries. Yeah.
Yeah.
And just about the evolution of it. It's like some of it, you mentioned it. You said it was homegrown, some of it, and they've done that too. The Giants, not Nubin, obviously, and Banks are two of the homegrown type plays. But they used the free agent money, which, by the way, man, this is the first offseason they felt like the shackles have been lifted from what Dave did with all the dead cap money that they inherited. They inherited an insane amount of dead cap, so they weren't able to really spend in free agency with the first roster they inherited because of what Dave did. So I'm not even going to include any of what Dave did from a dead cap standpoint. I'm just saying from the actual what they inherited part of the roster, there was a lot of free agent money on Solder still. There's a lot of free agent money on Kenny Golladay still. Instead, the Giants have transferred that money to players like Adebo and Holland. We haven't seen them play yet, but we can probably be sure that unless the worst possible scenario plays out for the Giants, those guys are going to contribute more than what Kenny Golladay was able to contribute and Nate Solder was able to contribute. So it's just been a very different way they've gone about building the secondary. But this one, I am personally for, because Nick, I've made this case before. I'm going to make it again and again and again. I personally, if I was running an NFL team, would opt to build my secondary through free agency. I would rather get the corners and the safeties after their first rookie contract, when the first teams that draft them have to deal with those 3-4 years of growing pains, because it's an impossible position to play in the NFL corner, a near impossible position to play with the current rules. And just with the obvious physics of it, you're moving backwards, the receiver's moving forwards at you. And safety, similar role, even tougher, I think, in some regards, because you have to do so many different things. The run game, you have to fill the alley, you have to play sometimes over the slot, you have to play deep half, you have to play in different kinds of, different kind of coverages. I'd rather invest in that free agency than take the guy in the second round that sucks for a while and then eventually gets good with another team. So personally, for me, Nick, this is how I want to build out a secondary. So I'm here applauding them because this is how I would prefer to do it.
There's one other safety that we failed to mention, played a total of 1 snap in
And that
2021. Can you remember who it was?
no.
Nate Ebner.
Oh, Nate Ebner,
The rugby player
the
from New England.
special teamer that they like.
Yep. Nico Lilos, edge rusher, Ivy League kid.
But yeah, man, looking at this defense overall, it's obvious they've taken a massive jump. The offense has taken a massive jump. I like the way they've constructed this roster. This exercise overall, if not for anything else, Nick, it made me feel a lot better about this current regime, and just given what they had to inherit and where they're at now.
Yeah, and maybe this is the plan that they laid out in front of like,
right.
Look, John, Mr. Mara, we need to take a long look at the roster that we inherited. Give us some time, okay? Because we decided to win early and we drank our own Kool-Aid and then we shot ourselves in the foot. And that's what happened, John. Give us a little bit of time to breathe. Let us find our quarterback and we will right the ship. We will fix this. Now, I'm not sold that that's the case, but I have to say there's at least some sort of plan in place, and I have enjoyed the last 2 off seasons from Joe Schoen, and off seasons where they were, I believe, a little bit more judicious, a little bit more level-headed, and they weren't like, hey, we just won a playoff game with Daniel Jones. Let's get Daniel Jones, Darren, and I'm not even knocking them for those decisions. It was just misguided, right? It was just misguided. Instead of just saying, hey, Daniel Jones, I know we just won a playoff game with you, but you suck, and I know you're 25 years old, so take a hike. That would have been a tough sell at the time. So now all that's gone, and we're starting afresh with a good foundational roster that was picked a lot by this front office and Joe Schoen. So let's see what they can do. There's still areas of this roster that I'm a little concerned about, but I'm feeling much better right now than I was back in 2021 and 2022.
As am I, Nick. As am I, and I don't think there's any reason not to be. Hopefully we're heading in the right direction. This is all on paper, but it's hard to imagine that this roster won't be more competitive than it was, not just last year, but, even throughout some of the times, the down times here. And so hopefully you guys enjoyed this exercise. It was different. It was fun for us. Maybe later this next week, we'll take a look at the 2024 roster compared to now. We didn't have time for that today. But please help us grow the show. Hit the like button, subscribe. More things to come in the off season. We'll have you have our back. We'll have yours as well. Otherwise, have a great rest of your week. We'll talk to you soon.